One time 3 years ago, I had a creepy experience at the movie theater. My boyfriend at the time and I would go to the movies fairly often as a date night. This specific night, we had made the hour drive out to where he lived to go to dinner and a movie. It was a Thursday night, and due to both of us having to work earlier that day, dinner ended up being later, and the movie we had picked to go see was being shown at 10:45 p.m. We got our popcorn and got to our seats right as the previews were wrapping up. I don't know if it was just because the movie showing was late at night or because it was a less popular romantic movie, but when we arrived, the theater was completely empty and we had it to ourselves. The movie got going and was about halfway through when we noticed a middle-aged man emerge from the hallway into the theater. I watched as he stood by the steps for a couple moments, glancing around the theater, before moving his way in and sitting in one of the lower rows a good way in front of us. I immediately got a bad vibe from this man, as he kept going on his phone and looking back behind him up towards us every so often. He seemingly had no intention of or interest in watching the movie. The man had been sitting there for only about 20 minutes when he got up from his seat and began walking up the stairs towards our row. My boyfriend and I were instantly on edge, watching to see what on earth he was doing. He walked up the steps very slowly, pausing at the end of our row, and then continued walking up, sitting in a seat 2 rows behind us, off to the side a little bit. I made subtle eye contact with my boyfriend, both agreeing that this guy was creeping us out. For the next half hour, we didn't really have a good time. We sort of half-heartedly watched the movie while also taking peeks over our shoulder to look at the man behind us, and he would glance away and pretend to be watching the movie as if he wasn't just staring at us. At this point, I also had to pee very badly. I didn't want to leave my boyfriend alone with the guy in the theater, but he urged me to go ahead and it would be okay. He'd watch out for the suspicious man. I walked down and out of the theater, heading to the nearest bathroom. As I reached the bathroom, I turned the corner to go inside and peeked behind me down the hallway as I did. I was shocked to see the man from the theater speed walking towards me down the hallway, and I saw him proceed to start jogging a bit as I rounded the corner. Very scared, I quickly decided not to enter the bathroom, and I walked quickly back out into the hallway. I went away from the man, who slowed down to a speed walk again as soon as I came back into view in the hallway. I also saw my boyfriend sprinting down the hallway behind the man. He had seen the man follow me out of the theater and decided that he was also going to exit the theater to make sure that I was safe. The man had closed the distance towards me, but heard the pounding of my boyfriend's feet hitting the floor while he ran and began to run also. He wasn't going towards me anymore, but was heading towards the exit. My boyfriend told me that he had intended to tackle him if he would have got close enough, but the man escaped out the exit door before my boyfriend caught up to him. We opted not to chase him outside into the darkness of the night, but instead notified one of the workers there at the time about the man and his behavior. My boyfriend and I ended up not going back into that movie theater for a little bit, and we ended up breaking up anyway, so I don't have to ever worry about being back in that movie theater. It was by far the scariest moment of my life, and I have no idea if that movie theater's had any more problems with the man. When I was in high school, I worked at a movie theater by my house for a couple of years. Oftentimes on weekends or during the summer, I would have to work a night shift. These late night shifts would include selling tickets and food at the front counter until the last movie wrapped up, usually a bit after midnight. The theater I worked at was a small one, with only 4 separate theaters. My job at the end of the night would entail doing a quick sweep job of the 4 theaters, then cleaning up the kitchen food area and taking out the trash. Because of how small the theater was, I worked these late night shifts by myself, and it would take me around an hour after the last movie ended to clean everything up and head home. The summer of my junior year of high school, I was working one of these late night shifts on a stormy night. The last movie had ended, and I made my usual announcement over the speakers that all the movies had ended. The theater was now closing, and to please exit the building. I locked the doors and began sweeping out the theaters. I had reached the second one when suddenly the power went out from the storm outside. Even without the lights on in the theaters, my eyes adjusted to the dark a bit, and I was able to continue sweeping the theaters. I had made my way into the third one now. I was sweeping near the front, and I heard one of the doors that led to the theater softly open and close. In the darkness, I was just able to make out someone enter the theater. I called out that the theater was closed and they needed to exit the building. Frightened by the no response that I received, I hustled out through the exit door to the other side. Then I made my way into the fourth theater to distance myself from whoever that person was. I ran up towards the top of the fourth theater and crouched down on the ground in between the seats. I looked to see if anybody was going to enter behind me. I crouched there for 5 to 10 minutes and was about to stand up and resume sweeping, hoping that the person had heard me and left the theater. I was quiet and ever so softly heard one of the doors to the theater open and close slowly. I laid down in one of the top rows of the theater, completely hiding myself behind the seats in front of me. I listened in horror as I heard footsteps walking back and forth between some rows, climbing closer and closer to my position. I lay in my row frozen and super still as I heard the footsteps enter a row maybe only 2 or 3 ones behind me. I was ready to make a run for it for the exit if they walked any closer to my location. But after a pause, I heard the person walk away and out of the theater. I quietly and carefully maneuvered my way back to the front desk without seeing the individual. They must have either entered a different theater or a restroom, or had left a movie theater entirely. I'm not sure. I grabbed my phone and keys from where I had left them on the front counter and ran through the rain to my car. Once inside my car, I called the cops and explained the situation. They showed up a little while later, and the pair of them searched the movie theater with their flashlights, but found no one. It was already late, and even though I hadn't finished all the cleaning up, I called it a night, locking the door and leaving right after the cops did. The rest of my time working at that theater, I had no more scary encounters like that at night. Whenever I worked a night shift from then on out, I always had every single light and zoomed through my cleaning duties, itching to get out of the theater. Recently, I went to the movies with my wife. We tend to go about once every month or two, since usually something comes out in that time span that catches our interest. This past time we went, it was to see a new horror movie that was out, and it had great reviews and was supposedly a really good scary movie. The showing we ended up going to was pretty packed, because it had just come out and it was also a Friday night. I ended up having somebody that sat next to me because of how packed the theater was. The man who was seated next to me appeared to be at the theater by himself, but other than that, nothing seemed too odd about him. The movie got going, and so far, it was as good as everyone had made it out to be. The man next to me had gotten up at some point, but I was so invested in the movie that I didn't even know how long he was gone for. When he came back, I heard that he was breathing heavily, and when I glanced over, he was also sweating a good amount. We made eye contact briefly, and then I resumed watching the movie. Once the movie ended, we made our way out of the side doors of the theater towards our car. We had gotten out into the parking lot close to our car when I saw that the man who had been sitting next to me was also walking behind us towards our spot. He must have parked near us as well. I glanced around, however, and we were the only car in our section of the parking lot. There wasn't a car anywhere near us. I peeked back towards the man, and he had followed us out of the side exit, and I didn't notice him anymore, which was odd. My wife and I entered our car, and were surprised to see the glove box was open, which definitely had not been left open. Inside the glove box, there was a note written on an old yellow piece of paper. The paper didn't have any words on it, just some ancient-looking symbol that I didn't recognize. We were frightened, and didn't see anyone else until we pulled out of the parking lot. Then we saw the man who was next to me in the theater, sitting on a curb near the edge of the woods, staring at us as we drove out. I had a sneaking suspicion that the man had either somehow stolen my keys or broken into the car and placed the symbol. The whole timeline of him leaving the movie, following us out to our car, disappearing, and then seeing him stare at us as we left was unsettling and made me sure that he was behind the paper in the glove box. I never found out what the symbol on the paper meant and never saw that man again, but it was not a comfortable experience that spooked my wife and I for a while. I went to the movies a couple of years ago with a small group of friends. We got the luxury of having the theater to ourselves, as no one else showed up to the showing that night. We decided to sit in the top row of the theater in the middle so that we could have the best view. While we walked up the stairs towards our seats, the movie hadn't started yet, so the theater was dimly lit as the previews played. When we walked down our row in the dim light, I thought I saw some movement through the window of that small room at the back of the theater where the film gets shown through. I know that in modern day movie theaters, they don't need a person usually to sit back there through the whole movie like they did in the past. I figured it was a worker though, just checking on something in that room before the film played. My seat ended up being right below that window, which made it maybe a foot or two above my head. About 15 minutes into the movie, my friends and I heard a soft tapping coming from behind us in the film room. It sounded like it might be tapping on the window right above our heads. The tapping steadily continued long enough for us to get a little angry about it and check out what was going on. We got up out of our seats and stood on our seats so that we could get a look into the room. The tapping noise had abruptly stopped while we were standing up on top of our seats, but we still wanted to check it out. My friends and I pressed our faces up against the glass. The film room on the other side of the glass was dark, and we didn't see anyone back there. Maybe the tapping had been part of the machinery back there that was playing the movie. Either way, the tapping wasn't going on anymore, so we went back to watching the movie. 5 to 10 minutes later, the tapping started once again. This time, it was louder and more rapid. It for sure sounded like someone was tapping on the window behind us this time. We stood up again quickly on our chairs to see what was going on in the room behind us. I pressed my face to the glass and fell backwards off my chair as a woman's face was staring right back at me on the other side of the glass, just a couple of inches from my face. We were annoyed that this woman was disturbing our movie and acting so weird behind us in the film room, so we went to the front desk to complain. At this point, we thought it was a worker back there employed by the movie theater. However, when we got to the front desk, they told us that none of the workers were interrupting our movie in the film room behind us. The 2 workers at the front said they were the only people working tonight. Puzzled, we told them that there was 100% a woman in the film room behind us who had been tapping on the window and then was staring at us. We led the workers into the theater to show them, but when they checked the film room, nobody was there. My friends and I were scared at this point, realizing that some random woman had been in that room behind us. We thankfully got our refunds for the movie, but we didn't want to stay any longer in that movie theater. During college, I took a girl to a drive-in movie theater once as a date. The movie showing was slotted for 9 p.m., so I picked her up from her place at 8 p.m., and then we made the drive out to the movie theater. I had never been to this place before, but from everything I had seen online said good things about it, so I was excited. The theater was farm-themed, so the watching area was surrounded by tall corn, and there were hay bales and tractors around, enhancing the feel of being on a farm. We arrived at the outdoor theater, and it was already really packed with only a couple of spots left. We ended up being directed to a spot on the edge of the clearing near the corn, but in a row close to the middle, so we weren't too far from the screen. We set up our blankets and pillows in the back of my pickup truck and waited for the movie to start. During the movie, I needed to pee and decided that I would try to hold it in. However, towards the end of the movie, I couldn't take it anymore, and I had to relieve myself. The bathrooms at the theater weren't anywhere near where my truck was parked, so I decided I would pee in the cornfield that we parked next to. I hopped out of the bed of the truck, venturing 5 or so feet out into the cornfield so that nearby cars wouldn't be able to see me peeing. I had drunk a lot of liquid before and during the movie, so it was one of those pees where it took a solid minute. With the amount of time that I was going to be spending peeing, I looked around aimlessly. I stared down my corn row and saw a pair of eyes reflected in my direction a good distance away. Must have been an animal of some kind, but it was odd that the eyes weren't moving. The animal wasn't moving, and the eyes never glanced away in a different direction. I finished peeing and got back into my truck at the end of the movie. The movie finished a little while later, and I packed up the blankets and pillows. My date was already seated in the front of the truck as I was packing up. While folding a blanket, I noticed a pair of eyes again in the cornfield, this time pretty close to the edge. Once again, the eyes did not move and were always staring at me whenever I looked over. I had never seen an animal act this way and was curious to see what type of animal it was, because I was guessing that it was some sort of predator. When I was pulling away in the truck, I backed up in a way so that my headlights would shine over where I had last seen the eyes in the corn. My date and I were shocked to see that in the far range of my headlights, there was a giant wolf walking back into the corn slowly with its back turned towards us. I had been guessing that it would be a fox or something, not a full-grown wolf. It was also very surprising to me that I didn't see any other wolves, and I know that they usually travel together. We watched together as the wolf disappeared into the darkness of the corn, out of range of my headlights. It was certainly chilling that I had peed out in the corn and been walking around the truck after the movie near a wolf of that size right nearby.